Good afternoon. Welcome once again to another episode of B&B Hockey Talk. I'm Aaron Bloxel with Matt Balzer, and today we're going to touch on the big trade that happened just a couple days ago. We actually had some recording from yesterday, but unfortunately it never saved, so we weren't able to post it. But we're going to touch on the Max Pacioretty trade as well as some other interesting things that have come about today. So, Matt, welcome to the show.
Yes, very, very interesting day yesterday, unfortunately. But hey, that means we'll do it even better than what we recorded prior. So,
all right. Well, why don't you break down? We're going to touch on the Max Pacioretty trade. Who do you think was the winner, or are we both in agreement that both teams win this trade?
Yeah, I think both teams got equal value on each side. Vegas getting Max Pacioretty. He's been one of the most consistent goal scorers if you take out last season, scoring between 30 to 39 goals 5 of the past 6 years. And getting that contract extension, the 4 years, $28 million. I think it's good for Vegas because they don't get into that 7-year term with Pacioretty already being close to 30 years old. And you'll fit in nicely on that second line with Paul Stastny and Alex Tuch. And then with Montreal getting Thomas Tatar, Nick Suzuki, and a second-round pick, which Vegas had gotten from Columbus in the expansion draft. I think the big thing here is Nick Suzuki, young centerman, 100 points last year for the Owen Sound attack. The Montreal desperately needs center help down the middle, and now they have Suzuki, and then they got Jesperi Niemi and Ryan Pelling, all first rounders over the past couple of years. So they got some centermen coming up in the system.
Yeah, for me, I think both teams won that trade. I mean, Vegas absolutely gets the best player out of it. That's the best player right now. In 5 years from now, he may not be the best player, but a team that was close to the Stanley Cup last year, they realized, I think, what they had in Tatar, because obviously they gave up a lot for him, but never really used him in the playoffs. And so they were able to part with him. Pacioretty brings a lot of talent and leadership to that young Vegas team. Actually, I don't think they're that young, but they still have a lot of great prospects in the system. So I think Vegas, it was a good move for them. In Montreal, they get Nick Suzuki. I'm really big on. I think in a couple of years he'll be an impact player for Montreal. Again, it's another centerman like you talked about, and I think Tatar will probably play on the top line with Drouin and Gallagher, and could easily put up 20 goals this year. So they did get a player back, which is nice. But they're Montreal. The neat thing about them is they're rebuilding right now on the fly. They've got 11 draft picks this year. Next year they've got 10 draft picks already. Restocking the farm very quickly, and not this year, but next year with key pieces in place, hopefully that are healthy with Shea Weber and Carey Price. They may still be in for a Stanley Cup run. So what other thing on that trade stands out to you? And then let's go into the big I guess it was a smaller trade today with Adam McQuaid.
Yeah. So the big thing here is that Vegas still has over $9 million in cap space to potentially still go after Erik Karlsson. Because I think up front they're pretty much set in goal with Fleury. They're set, but that defense, they got a few good pieces with the Nate Schmidt, Colin Miller, and Shea Theodore. But with Schmidt having that 20-game suspension to start the year, that will be tough to replace for Vegas. And and the big thing is when I think they get that big superstar defenseman, I think they're pretty much set to go on another long playoff run this year. And then also bringing up the Habs captaincy for this coming year. I'm guessing it'll be Brendan Gallagher over Shea Weber. I think, even though Weber, I think, is the better fit, but I think Gallagher, he's just everything the Habs fans love to watch, and that leadership off the ice. I think he'd be a good fit as a team captain.
Well, I think Eric Carlson still may be moved to Las Vegas. They definitely have the room for it, and that piece would definitely make them big-time Stanley Cup contender. We're going to touch on the mess in Ottawa in a few minutes, but first, why don't you break down the trade today, the Adam McQuaid trade?
Yeah, so Adam McQuaid got traded to the New York Rangers for Steven Kampfer, a fourth-round pick in 2019, and a conditional seventh-round pick. Kampfer started off with the Boston Bruins. He played there for a couple of years. And the big thing here is for Boston to free up cap space. They free up $2.1 million in cap space, and they now have a total of just over $5 million. Boston had eight. When they had McQuaid, they had 8 NHL defensemen, all making over at least $1 million. So with that, they can look to add a forward up front, because I think losing Rick Nash and not really replacing him with anybody, they signed a couple depth forwards, but they still need another top 9 forward, and that frees up the cap space for them to go after somebody. And McQuaid, thing is, when he's healthy, is a good veteran presence on the back end. He's big, tough. But last year he only played 38 games, and he's consistently battled through injuries over the past few years. But if he does stay healthy, he'll be a good veteran for the Rangers this coming year.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we talked about before we went on air how the Canucks have 8 defensemen, but some would argue whether they're NHL defensemen or not. But they are under NHL contracts, and it's weird that more teams don't do proactive moves like that to free up cap space to move players prior to the season. We both think Boston's now able to add a free agent at the beginning of the year. Maybe Rick Nash, we don't know. But other news today, Tampa Bay Lightning general manager Steve Yzerman steps down. Why don't you fill us in on that?
Yeah, so after 8 years, it's sort of crazy to think 8 years already that Yzerman has been the general manager for the Tampa Bay Lightning. He stepped down mostly due to family reasons. So sort of like the Trevor Linden situation here, but we don't know the full extent of the Linden and the owners here. But with that, Julien Brisebois becomes the new general manager of the Tampa Bay Lightning. He'd been the assistant general manager under Yzerman for many years. He'd been the general manager for the American Hockey League for 3 years at least. So a lot of those young guys like Kucherov, Palat, Vasilevsky, all these guys that have played down the American Hockey League. He's been key in setting that roster down there. And he's been, I believe I saw Pierre LeBrun say he's been the highest paid assistant general manager in the NHL last season. And his name's come up a lot on open general manager positions this off season. So it'll be up to him to finish this thing through for Tampa Bay. Yzerman's done an amazing job getting this team to do everything except win the Stanley Cup. So we'll see if Tampa Bay can finish it through this year. And Yzerman becomes a senior advisor with the team this year. But after this following year, he doesn't know what exactly he'll do. Maybe he might end up in Detroit, as we were talking earlier. You brought that up, just for the family reasons. I could see that.
Yeah, it comes as a surprise to me only because they're so close to being built here for the Stanley Cup. But obviously, Yzerman, he'll be around for this year. He's been living in Detroit those last 8 years, even though he's working in Tampa Bay. So it's definitely playing a toll on his family. And Detroit would probably love to have him back because they've been awful ever since he left.
Yeah.
So, it creates rumors that he is going to go back eventually to Detroit and possibly work for the Red Wings. But time will tell. Now, Ottawa is a complete mess. Everybody already knows that. They released a really strange video late last night when all their fans were in bed at 10 p.m. They released a video. Why don't you touch on that and some of the things that were interviewed from the owner, Larry Melnick?
Yeah, so this was one of like the most awkward,
Sorry, Eugene
cringe-worthy.
Melnick.
Yeah, yeah.
I
So
call him
yeah, so
Larry Melnick, an ex-Vancouver Canuck.
yeah, yeah. So this was one of the most awkward, cringe-worthy interviews I've ever seen. The Ottawa defenseman Mark Borowiecki sat down with owner Eugene Melnick for just over a 5-minute interview, and it was so weird. It's just like Melnick was wearing like this. Well, for one, he didn't even have the new Ottawa Senators jersey. He was wearing one of the old Reebok jerseys. So he's cheap with his roster. He's even cheaper with his jerseys, I guess. They can't even have a hate jersey, but yeah, he was talking about like saying like people say that Ottawa is like sort of like in like a dumpster sort of thing with their roster and where they're heading, and he doesn't think that it's like at least he did bring up the word rebuild, which in Vancouver here, that's what we've basically just been waiting for Canucks management to say. But he had some interesting comments. He said this year there will be 10 rookies in the lineup this year. That means players that have had 9 games or less NHL experience in this year's lineup. And he said in the following season that it'll be up to 15 to 16 skaters. So what does this mean about Erik Karlsson, Matt Duchene, Mark Stone? All 3 of those guys are unrestricted free agents at the end of this season. I think these guys are going to be traded soon or at the trade deadline. So it was such a weird thing. And just like all the Ottawa fans in their comments were just like, what is going on? Because Melnick didn't even address the Karlsson situation going into training camp at all. It was also reported, Ian Mendez from TSN reported that out of the 18,000 seats in the Senators' home arena, only 4,000 season tickets have been sold going into this year. So the Melnick out effect is in full force. And Melnick also said he's not going anywhere. He's sticking around for the long term. But man, oh man, is it a mess in Ottawa?
Is it ever? That is. Wow, it's disturbing if Ottawa only has 4, 5, 6,000 people in attendance during some of these games this year. But I do see a fire sale coming, especially with all the UFAs. It'll be really interesting to see what they can get back now that all the teams know that they're going to have a fire sale. It's going to be interesting to see what they can get back for those players and what teams are going to step up to try to lure those players there and what they're willing to give up for them. So Ottawa definitely rebuilding, creating something for the future, and it'll be interesting to see how they go. Well, that's it for this episode of B&B Hockey Talk. Remember to like and comment on our post, whether you're following us on Facebook, or subscribe and comment if you're following us on YouTube. We love hearing comments from you. What did you like about the show? Leave us your thoughts about whether the Pacioretty trade, who you think won it, or any of the other subjects that we talked about today, the mess in Ottawa, Steve Yzerman stepping down, or the Boston trade with McQuaid to the Rangers. So leave us some comments. Let us know your thoughts, and we will see you on our next edition.